Il governo ha perso il referendum e da lì in poi è stato un po' un crollo di cose. Diversi membri importanti del governo e del Parlamento si sono dimessi, tra cui il ministro del turismo Daniela Santanchè, per questioni però che non riguardano direttamente il referendum stesso, ma è chiaro che l'impatto c'è stato.
What if one sentence just destroyed the most powerful unelected politician in European history? On January 15th, 2026, Giorgia Meloni walked up to a podium, looked directly into the cameras, and said the words that Ursula von der Leyen has been having nightmares about since the moment she seized control of the European Commission. Not a threat, not a warning, a verdict, delivered with the cold precision of someone who has been sharpening this blade for years and has finally chosen the exact moment to drive it home. Within minutes, Brussels went into full panic mode. Within hours, the entire European political establishment was shaking. And within 24 hours, it became undeniably clear that what Meloni just triggered is not a political disagreement that diplomats can smooth over in a weekend summit. It is the beginning of the complete and total unraveling of Ursula von der Leyen's power, her legacy, and possibly the European Union itself. Giorgia Meloni did not stumble into this moment. She engineered it. Every move she has made since taking power in Rome in October 2022 has been building toward this single, perfectly timed detonation that she set off on a cold January morning while Brussels was still half asleep and completely unprepared for what was about to hit them. Understanding why this moment is so catastrophic for von der Leyen requires understanding something that the European establishment has spent years trying to obscure from public view. The European Union's entire power structure rests on one foundational assumption: that member states will challenge Brussels quietly, privately, through approved institutional channels, and never, under any circumstances, go fully public with the accusation that the Commission has lost its fundamental right to govern. Meloni just violated that assumption so completely and so publicly that there is no institutional mechanism capable of containing the damage. She stood before the cameras, flanked by her European conservatives and reformist coalition partners, and delivered a statement that was not drafted overnight. It was the product of months of meticulous preparation, legal review, economic analysis, and coalition building that von der Leyen's intelligence apparatus completely failed to detect or anticipate. Meloni declared that the European Commission under Ursula von der Leyen has lost its legitimacy to govern the economic and sovereign affairs of Italy. 7 words that constitute the nuclear option of European politics, spoken not by a fringe populist on the margins of the system, but by the sitting Prime Minister of the European Union's third largest economy, a founding member nation whose participation in the European project is not optional for Brussels. It is existential. Without Italy, the European Union does not function. Without Italy's budget contributions, the Commission cannot pay its bills. Without Italian political cooperation, the entire Southern European framework that holds the Eurozone together begins to fracture in ways that cannot be repaired through emergency summits or diplomatic phone calls. Von der Leyen's team understood the magnitude of what had just happened within minutes of Meloni's statement reaching Brussels. The Commission's crisis response unit, which was designed to handle external shocks like financial market collapses and geopolitical emergencies, was activated for an internal political threat for only the second time in European Union history. Staff were pulled from scheduled meetings. Communications directors were locked in emergency sessions, drafting responses and then discarding them because every response they produced made the situation worse rather than better. Because here's the problem that no amount of crisis communications expertise can solve. Meloni did not just attack von der Leyen personally. She attacked the structural legitimacy of the entire Commission, and she backed every single word with data that Brussels cannot dispute, cannot hide, and cannot explain away. Italy's public debt has reached 138.3% of GDP, a number so dangerous that it triggers automatic alarm protocols inside the European Central Bank's risk assessment models. Under the Stability and Growth Pact that Brussels has been enforcing with increasing aggression since 2025, Rome is being legally required to implement spending cuts and tax increases of a scale that Italian economists across the political spectrum have described as economically suicidal for a nation already struggling with the highest cost of living pressures in a generation. Meloni did not dispute that Italy has a debt problem. She did something far more politically devastating. She pointed the camera directly at Brussels and asked why the European Commission's own administrative budget has expanded by 18% since von der Leyen took office, while simultaneously demanding that Italian hospitals cut services, Italian schools reduce staff, and Italian pensioners accept reduced payments. That question does not have a good answer. Von der Leyen's team knows it does not have a good answer, and the silence coming from Brussels in response to that specific question is the loudest confirmation that Meloni has found the wound that will not stop bleeding. But the fiscal hypocrisy, as devastating as it is, was only the first layer of Meloni's assault, because what she said next targeted something that von der Leyen has spent 5 years constructing as her defining political legacy and her guaranteed place in the history books. The European Green Deal, the sweeping climate transformation agenda that was supposed to prove that Europe could lead the world into a sustainable future, is not just struggling, it is collapsing. And Meloni has been quietly, systematically, and brilliantly building the coalition that is pulling it apart piece by piece, while von der Leyen stood at podiums across the world, taking credit for European climate leadership that no longer reflects the reality on the ground. The 2035 combustion engine ban that was the centerpiece of von der Leyen's entire environmental legacy has been gutted so completely through the exemptions Meloni's coalition forced through that independent automotive analysts are describing the remaining policy as effectively meaningless. Von der Leyen called it pragmatic evolution. Every serious political observer in Europe called it what it actually was: a humiliating total defeat orchestrated entirely by the woman now standing at a podium in Rome pronouncing her political death sentence. And the document Meloni's team has prepared for the next phase of this assault contains figures about European industrial collapse that will make today's panic in Brussels look like a calm afternoon. Because what comes next is not another policy attack. It is a direct strike at the one thing von der Leyen cannot survive losing, and she is about to lose it completely. The one thing Ursula von der Leyen cannot survive losing is the narrative, the carefully constructed story that Brussels has been selling to 450 million Europeans for the past 5 years, that the Commission is competent, legitimate, indispensable, and irreplaceable. That without Brussels coordinating, regulating, and directing European life from its glass towers, the entire continent would descend into chaos and fragmentation. That narrative is the only real source of power von der Leyen possesses, because her institutional authority was never rooted in democratic mandate. It was rooted in the belief that the system works and that she is the system. Meloni just burned that narrative to the ground with a single press conference, and the fire is spreading faster than anything Brussels has ever been forced to contain. The numbers that Meloni's team released alongside her statement are not political opinions that can be dismissed as partisan attacks. They are verified figures drawn directly from the European Court of Auditors, the International Monetary Fund, and the Commission's own internal reporting documents that Brussels publishes in technical language specifically designed to ensure that ordinary Europeans never actually read them. Meloni read them, her economists analyzed them, and then she translated them into language that every Italian factory worker, every French nurse, every German pensioner, and every Spanish graduate living in their parents' apartment at age 28 because they cannot afford rent can understand with absolute clarity. The Horizon Europe Scientific Research Program, which was supposed to keep European universities and laboratories competitive with American and Chinese institutions, has had its funding rated to cover interest payments on pandemic borrowing that von der Leyen assured European taxpayers would never burden future generations. The Erasmus Plus student exchange program, that has defined European youth identity and cross-border solidarity for decades, is being quietly defunded while Commission administrative salaries continue climbing. Infrastructure projects from Portugal to Poland are being canceled or delayed indefinitely, while Brussels expands its own bureaucratic apparatus with money that was promised to European citizens for purposes they actually care about. This is not mismanagement. This is not the inevitable consequence of global economic pressures that no leader could have avoided. This is the direct, traceable result of specific decisions made by Ursula von der Leyen and her Commission. And Meloni has constructed a forensic case that assigns accountability with a precision that leaves no room for deflection or excuse. Von der Leyen's standard response to criticism has always been to retreat into technical complexity, to bury challengers in regulatory language and institutional procedure until the public loses interest and moves on. That strategy requires one critical condition to function. It requires that the challenger does not understand the technical details well enough to fight on that terrain. Meloni understands every detail. She is prepared for every deflection. And she has translated the entire case into language so simple and so direct that Brussels cannot obscure it no matter how many technical briefings they release or how many compliant media outlets they brief with counter-narratives. The political coalition Meloni has assembled behind this offensive represents something that von der Leyen's worst nightmares never fully anticipated. Hungary and Poland, the traditional rebel states that Brussels learned to isolate and dismiss as democratic backsliders outside the European mainstream, are now joined by voices that cannot be dismissed with the same institutional contempt. The Czech government, Slovakia's leadership, and critically elements within the governing coalitions of Austria and the Netherlands are now publicly signaling alignment with Meloni's legitimacy challenge in language that stops just short of open endorsement, but leaves absolutely no room for alternative interpretation. When the rebellion against Brussels authority extends beyond the usual suspects into nations that have previously been reliable Commission allies, the political map of Europe is not shifting, it is being redrawn entirely, and von der Leyen is standing in the center of that redrawing with no allies capable of stopping it and no institutional tool powerful enough to reverse it. But here is what makes the next 72 hours the most dangerous period Ursula von der Leyen has ever faced in her entire political career. Meloni has not finished. What she released on January 15th was not her complete case. It was the opening argument. The evidence she has been holding in reserve, the documents her legal team has been preparing for months that go beyond fiscal hypocrisy and failed climate policy into territory so explosive that Commission insiders who have seen fragments of what is coming are refusing to discuss it on the record with any journalist from any publication. What those documents allegedly contain does not just challenge von der Leyen's competence or her policy judgments. It challenges something so fundamental to the Commission's legitimacy that if it becomes public in the form Meloni's team intends to release it, the question will no longer be whether von der Leyen survives politically. The question will be whether the European Commission itself survives in its current form. And the answer, according to sources inside 3 separate European government offices who spoke anonymously, is one that Brussels is not prepared to face. Meloni did not come to Brussels to negotiate. She came to dismantle. Every calculation she has made, every coalition she has built, every document her team has prepared points toward one single destination: the complete collapse of von der Leyen's authority and the forced restructuring of a European power system that has operated without genuine accountability for decades. The evidence is assembled, the allies are positioned, the countdown has started, and when those documents go public, every European citizen will be forced to confront the reality that Meloni has been warning about since the moment she took power in Rome. The system was never working for them, it was working against them. If you want to be the first to know exactly what those documents contain and why Brussels insiders are calling this the most dangerous political revelation in European Union history, hit that like button right now, subscribe immediately, and turn on notifications because part 3 drops sooner than you think. The establishment is already trying to suppress this story. Do not let them.